Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is episode 3 of my Valentino Bay city build series on Cities Skylines 1. In the last episode, we built this very low-key high street with short and flat buildings, trying to make them look as good as possible on a curved road. This town is quite bustling now. It's got a population of nearly 1,000 people, but the commercial is struggling because the residents aren't educated enough. So today we're going to build an education block so we can start getting that education levels up. We're going to be using this area at the very start of the town. It's going to have a primary school, a secondary school, a library and a children's healthcare centre, and I'm going to be using parks to artificially extend the assets to make the grounds look larger. We'll start with the primary school so that we can start getting the education levels up in the town, and I'll show you some ways that you can elevate your builds. So we're going to be using the regular vanilla elementary school for this build because we don't want it to be anything too fancy. And then it's got this park detailing out of the back, but it kind of feels a little bit open to be a primary school ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a park from the workshop to extend the grounds out the back and make it feel a little bit more secure while also making it look better. This park has a path going down the middle. So I'm going to twist this asset so it's all the way around the other way and then pull it down here until that symbol disappears, kind of line it up with the road down there. Now these two assets look like they're combined, but it still feels a little bit too open for a primary school, so I'm going to go into the Find It catalogue and I'm going to grab the hedges and just fill in these little gaps here. So by connecting this hedge all the way down, it looks like this is the primary school grounds, and people will kind of walk through this hedge, but they will also enter through here. As you can see, people can actually move from one asset to the other, even though there's no pathway there. So seeing people moving between the two is going to make it feel even more like it's just one asset. Over on this side, I'm going to put the Child Healthcare Centre. I like to put these two assets together because it's like one place for all of the families to go. This has obviously created this horrible little gap in the middle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it with some trees. I'm going to pick the yew tree because it gives a really nice canopy of shade and it looks really great from the ground as well. So I'm just going to place these in the middle of this gap and pull it to the back of the healthcare centre. Now that gap looks a little bit more intentional than just being an empty space of grass. On this side of the school, I'm going to do a fence all the way along to this side of the road. And then I'm going to extend the fence to the edge of this park asset. This is almost like the school field out here, so I'm going to grab some football goals and put them down this end. And I've also got some more playground assets from the workshop, so I'm just going to put some of these in here as well. I'm just going to use the surface painter tool to make the ground around the goals look a little bit roughed up, and I'm going to try and get them as even as possible. I need to move these slightly so that they're a little bit more on these patches. Now this looks like every school field where the goalie would stand and kick his feet while he's waiting for something to happen. The back of this yard still looks a little bit empty, so I'm just going to add some trees down here to give it a little bit of shade and to kind of block it off from the road a bit more. So now instead of just a boring vanilla school asset, we've got probably the best looking primary school I've ever seen. Like, who wouldn't want a zip line in their playground? This is great for when you're doing really big builds and you don't want the schools to look repetitive, because when you're working with limited assets, it can really get boring after a while. I like to do stuff like this to keep it interesting and to make it feel a little bit more realistic. Now over on this side is going to be the secondary school. It's going to be a fairly low capacity secondary school because I don't want everyone to be well educated. As this is a rural town, we're still going to need uneducated Sims to work on the farm. Again with this build, I'm going to be using a park to extend the grounds, but it's going to be slightly different to the primary school. So for the secondary school, I'm going to be using this contemporary high school from the workshop. It's actually got 4 different variations, which I didn't realise the first time I used it. So I'm going to place the school over on this side near these houses. And I'm going to change the variation to the largest one. For the park, I'm going to be using this high school soccer field from the workshop. And I know they're overlapping, but don't worry, I'm going to be fixing that. So for the soccer field, I'm actually going to pull it all the way down to the road down here. And then I'm going to move the high school over a little bit and kind of line them up so that they're parallel. Much like with the primary school, I'm going to be using fences and other detailing to kind of join these assets together. I'm going to use the same fencing as the primary school to keep that common theme going. Now that these two assets are combined within one fence, they feel a lot less separate. Now I'm going to use some trees and other assets to fill in the empty areas. So here is the finished secondary school lot. There's some additional fences in here, like one behind the goal. There's a door right here, so I thought it's probably not the best idea if people are coming out of their school and going straight onto a football field. And there's another fence that closes off this gap. Again, people are walking through it. I'm not so fussed about where they're actually walking, it's more so for the aesthetics of it. Back here is just a few benches and a basketball hoop. No one will actually use them back here, but it's the kind of thing you find in a secondary school ground. I also added a car park down side here because this school asset didn't come with one. This would be for staff and older students who might drive to school, although that isn't as common in the UK because you leave school at 16, you can't drive until you're 17. So unless this school had a college attached to it, in the UK this would just be for staff. Now we've just got this small gap here left, and this is the perfect shape and size for a library. I have this small public library from the workshop and it fits perfectly in this gap. I'm just going to move it back and line it up with the healthcare building next door to it, and then fill in the concrete around the back here. This little gap down here is going to need some trees, so let's carry on with the U. I'm going to place these manually this time because it's a lot smaller of a gap, and they will sit over the concrete ever so slightly, but you might be able to move them back so that they're not so overlapping. There we go, that's only sitting into the fence a little bit from the other side, but I think that looks alright. There's not room for another U on this corner here, so I'm just going to chuck some bushes down to fill this gap. I've gone with the same ones from the farming area to keep that theme running, but I've added in some floral ones as well. Down the side of the building here, I'm just going to mimic what we did over here with the car park and put a couple of planters with these floral trees. And with that, our education block is complete. Despite how busy and complicated this looks, this was actually relatively low effort. I've only actually been filming for 40 minutes and I've got to say, the majority of that was me having to re-record things because my brain and my mouth just aren't connecting today. And now you know, if you want to do something like this in your builds, it's not going to take you very long at all. This primary school area feels so much more fleshed out than just plopping one of the vanilla assets down. I love taking assets and merging them together and making them into modular pieces to create something new. I've tried my hand at the asset editor and I've got to say I'm not very good at it, so I'm glad that there are plenty of people out there who are creating these parks. This secondary school area feels a lot more like an American high school, at least from what I've seen from films and TV shows. I think it fits the district quite well because the school building is very low and flat like the commercial and utility buildings. The library also follows that theme, but it has a little bit of an extra touch with the peaked roof. And I do think it looks a little bit more like a church than a library, but whatever it looks like, it's giving this town an education boost. And the child healthcare centre next door is going to be raising happiness levels and the birth rate as well. Hopefully by having these schools in now, the commercial buildings won't be struggling to have educated workers anymore, and the town should become fairly self-sufficient after a while. Obviously there's still a lot of things we don't have in this build yet, but we've got plenty of time to take each one of these things slowly and thoughtfully. I hope you've enjoyed today's build. Let me know what you think of it in the comments, and also let me know if there's anything you want to see later in the series. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.